Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Thursday, the 22nd of January 2025, 26. Every new year in January, I got a tendency to say it was the previous year instead of the new year. Usually by February, I get it right. So we're going to be doing a die-off show about an unbelievably important one tonight. You know, in a couple of years, the whales will be gone. Not in a decade, but in a couple of years. And the reason we're saying that is because and among everything else, it'll be gone too. The bigger creatures. We're seeing all the species of whales worldwide symmetrically showing up in severe emaciation. The food chain was broken. Just after 2011, Fukushima nuclear event, it covered the entire planet in radioactive fallout. And so I'm not going to do a huge introduction like I typically do to acclimate people who are not familiar with this topic. We'll kind of, we'll pick up information as we bring it about. So the oceans and all the fresh water worldwide was covered immediately with radioactive fallout. And what I mean by that, 20 to 30 days. The entire planet, this plume of plutonium, which is, the plume is neptunium-239, but it decays to plutonium in entirety after 25 days. So every 2.5 days, there's a 50% of the neptunium would decay to plutonium-239. This has a half-life of 24,000 years. It's going to be long past the human and the species experience, but that's just one of the many isotopes. And the industry has pretty good control over the media, the universities, and key positions in government worldwide. Certainly all the UN signatory countries, 195 countries, which is the influential medias in countries worldwide. And they're trying to blame the mass species die-off, per se, the ocean, on what they describe as blob, the scientists and their blob. I put a link in the description to the song that James Lucid had put together to help articulate that. We're going to start the show off with that. And this is what they're trying to blame it off, but I'm going to show you what actually happens right after. And we're going to jump into, we have some pretty wild documentation to get through. We'll see you in about 3 minutes or so. Yeah, 3 minutes. I'll be right back.
The birds washed up, feathers torn, scientists mumble, eyes are worn, shake their heads, say what went wrong, check the numbers, drag it along, they write their books, shake their hands, watch it sink into the sand, call it heat, call it tide, lungs fill.
Hello, everybody. Here we go. So we got a cold front all across North America. Down here next week, included. It's going to be nasty -25. It's going to be brutal cold again tonight. I hope everybody, like Dana Nassan is saying in the comments section, you're your moderator. Hope everybody stays warm. Yeah, ionizing radiation makes the weather incredibly brutal. We might even touch upon that coming up. We're going to jump on the full screen. James is working on some real cool technology for his music, and it should work out really good for everybody. It's a benefit to humanity, that kind of commitment that he has, right? It's very unusual. Well, it's almost non-existent, right? It's just less than a handful of people out there that has a resolve. We're very fortunate. So, Japan had 4 reactors melt down. And they melted down by detonating. This was reactor 3. This was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. At the top of the building was around 8 reactor cores. And as you can imagine, that you ejected the reactor cores right into the building. Each of those reactor cores were equal to about 100 Cheronobyls. So each of the reactor buildings are close to 1,000 Cheronobyls, and we had lost 4. But across from reactor 4 was the common spent fuel pool, and the evidence we have suggests that we might have lost the inventories from that, which could have been around 11 million pounds. And that evidence that came out in 2021 strongly suggests, well, it came out originally, right, the first year, but in 2021 there was 736 pictures released that strongly suggested not only was the common spent fuel pool gone also, but reactor 6. And there was supporting documentation before that, so that makes it even worse. The International Atomic Energy Agency is leading the cover-up. They're talking about tritium, but this is not tritium. This is uranium, plutonium. The biggest byproduct is the curium isotopes. You're not going to see a tritium plume. Everything is tritiated, by the way, 3H, because water can become radioactive by being contaminated. And so no species are meant to consume anthropogenic man-made radiation. There's adverse effects that are long-lasting and are generational and could even stop the reproduction of the majority of the species. So they picked up 30 million one-ton bags just in the Fukushima prefecture, but the food was banned from 14 prefectures. So every time they have a typhoon or rain or snow in Japan, the whole country is washing more radiation out into the ocean. A lot of these particles are splitting atoms because you atomized an aerosol and ionized infrastructure, but you also ejected 36 reactor cores into the environment. And just to give you some context of why this is a problem for all the species, including you, is because all species consume plants or phytoplankton in the ocean, for instance, and that goes all the way up the food chain through the contamination. But we eat grapes, for instance, and we know for a fact strawberries and grapes and plants, tomato plants, for instance. All of this is well established, will accumulate anthropogenic man-made radiation. So when you eat it or animals eat this stuff, they become poisoned. Radiation is poison. Anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout is poison. And that's why 55 countries ban the food in 14 prefectures. But that was only for a decade. They replaced these people in increments over that decade and removed those restrictions. But there is just a sickening amount of studies acknowledging that food is your enemy within proximity to radiation fallout, and it's one of the most common ways of poisoning you is through your food. So almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, so this industry has it in for you. I just want you to appreciate that this study was 2019 of the Marshall Islands. I'll get it out of the way here. Behind me you'll see 2019, July the 15th, right? That's when it was first published. There's a lot to this study, but that sentence up there, the radioactive fallout from the nuclear test, which is the same as the nuclear war, it's the same radioactive fallout. So when you hear nuclear testing, they're not 100% honest. It makes you think, oh, well, it's okay, but it's not. It's the same bomb with the same radioactive fallout. But just from the Marshall Islands, it contaminated over 1 million square kilometers of land and ocean. So this study showed that in 2019, this compromised the habitability of the affected atolls and the ocean itself, right? And then if you look back through the legacy of the nuclear industry, it's not just Fukushima. You got 80 years at this stage of emissions from the nuclear industry, but 80 years of dumping, and you got 1,000 fuel pools that are hemorrhaging radiation directly into the environment. So this is just like Belgium and England, for instance. This is just a fraction of what they dumped, and they're criminally underestimating the significance and the amounts that were dumped. I got a little example to help articulate that coming up in 4 more clicks. Now, the show tonight is it's going to be a 2-part show because there's so many significant catastrophic die-offs going on in just the last couple of weeks. We can't sit here, because my shows start 10 p.m. my time, usually in midnight. It's been that way for a long time. Since I came off the ocean from the research expeditions, I try to regulate my show at a Pacific time, so those that were able to or wanted to catch the show, hopefully that gave them an opportunity to schedule the ability to catch the show. Now, I'm very, very, very heavily censored, so don't let the numbers trick you or deceive you into thinking that this is not important. Between 1949 and 66, United Kingdom never stopped, by the way, in 1966. It's absurd to suggest that they did. They were going out all day, every day for about 30 years plus with special freighters that were dumping nuclear waste, high-level waste, on the continental shelf, which is considered the nursery of the Atlantic. There's still 8 million litres a day going into the ocean from the Sellafield site, which used to be called Windscale, from plutonium mixed oxide nuclear meltdown, a breeder reactor that was making plutonium for their weapons. The United States, Russia, Japan, other countries have polluted the oceans with radiation. The Navy dumped thousands of tons of radioactive waste until, in fact, they didn't keep track of it. These countries never kept track of it. And they were dumping it randomly all over the continental shelf. It's not like which doesn't matter how you done it, but it's not like they went out and dumped it into one spot. The boats never stopped. The boats were always moving. So and these 45-gallon drums, the tops and bottoms are crimped on. So when they get down a couple of atmospheres, like an atmosphere says 33 feet, it's 14.6 pounds per square inch. So as soon as it hits the next atmosphere, 34 feet, there's another 14.6 pounds per square inch applied to the 45-gallon drums, for instance. And when it gets down to 100 feet, you're talking about another atmosphere. So you're talking about 40, 50 pounds per square inch, which is going to crush the drums. That'll uncrimp the tops and bottoms, and the nuclear waste was released directly into the environment immediately. We're almost there. Soviet Union has 18,000 dumps in the Arctic. Russia dumped 19 radioactive ships plus 14 nuclear reactors into the ocean. This is absurdness. It's a total disregard for 8 million species. This picture, I'm not sure, my take on this picture is, now they're saying it's real, but as far as I can tell, it's AI, and I'm actually really good at picking that stuff out. I'll explain that coming up, why I'm saying that. This study, let me bring it up on the other screen. I can't see the date on it. This significant amount of plutonium released for months, radioactivity from Fukushima plant was measured globally and blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. So you're talking about square meter and a cubic meter of air, but you're talking about a square meter of Earth's surface was heavily contaminated. This stuff will be here long after everybody and every species is gone. And the industry, the map to your left was the Neptunium-239, which of course decays to plutonium. That model was based on 20 days. So I want you to go backwards for 1 second. There was 40 miles of unlined trenches used for dumping nuclear waste at Hanford site. And they put the word leaking there. So if something leaks and it fills up 40 miles of trenches, 40 miles of trenches, would you describe that as a leak, or would you describe it as a catastrophic event? Now, the stuff that we're talking about was dehydrated. They boiled off the sludge, and the stuff that was left over was the sludge, and that's what they were dumping in these unlined trenches. It's equal. The amount that there was a total in that period, same period, of 450 billion gallons, which works out to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet. Wrap your mind around that statement. Because the industry likes to tell you that they can put all of their nuclear waste in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But the problem is, when you start looking at the Manhattan projects, you start looking at the Mayak, the Soviet Union, Russia, you start looking at China, India, Pakistan, of the stuff they actually dumped. It's a wonder we made it this far, and we ain't going to make it much further if we don't rein in this industry and deal with it. We got to come to our reality now, is that these species you're looking at, this is severe emaciation. This is last stage. They die. These species were alive when they came ashore, believe it or not. They have no muscles, they have no fat, they have no blubber, and so they are not going to float. And then, because they're in such catastrophic conditions, severe emaciation, if they did sink and eventually washed up on the beaches, they wouldn't be looking like they are now. They would be torn apart, right? Because they have nothing to hold them together. And this isn't madness what we're talking about. That blue whale up there maybe weighs, say, 30,000 pounds, 100 feet long, of bones and skin. It's missing 350,000 pounds. The whale up here is missing around 86,000 pounds, that Bride's whale. There's another Bride's whale from a little over a week ago. It might weigh 4,000 pounds, but it should weigh 90,000 pounds. The gray whale up in the corner is these are huge whales. This blue whale is a separate blue whale. This should weigh 380,000 pounds. It might weigh 25,000, say. Let's say it weighed 80,000 pounds, which is absurd to suggest that it does. It's still missing 300,000 pounds. So when you see that peanut head, all you can see is bones. This is absurdness. And the only reason that the whales can survive to this in this capacity is because they're in the ocean. The ocean supports them, right? If it was on land and this was an elephant, it could never be that emaciated, right? All right. So this was from last year or the year before. The windscreen phenomenon, why your car is no longer covered in dead insects. Now, I've been reporting on that since about 2014 when I discovered the insects were missing. The 30,000 insects in the tidal zones from British Columbia to Alaska were missing, along with all the species, which we'll touch up on that a little tiny bit later. This was a story from a week ago. Save the whales worked for decades, but now gray whales are starving. So they're trying to blame, this is an incredible acknowledgement, the gray whales are starving. And I showed you a gray whale right here, up in the top. It should weigh almost 90,000 pounds. It maybe weighs 5,000 pounds. It has no muscle mass, no blubber, no fat whatsoever. So the food chain has been broken. It takes a long time. It takes a long time for them to become emaciated, several years. And what we know about the gray whale population in particular, they do this. They have a well-established migratory routine, right? They'll say they're at Baja, California. They'll travel for 12,000 miles to the Bering Sea, Kamchatka, up by Alaska area, and then they'll turn around and they'll head back to Baja, California. When they get there, it's 12,000 miles. They'll feed and then they'll migrate back to Baja, California. So when they leave Baja, California, that's where their calving area. So last year they had no surviving calves made it to their northerly run. So when they headed south, they had no surviving calves. We've never seen that before. Now, they were emaciated at that stage, and that's why we're seeing them showing up in these severe, just heartbreaking conditions. And last year, when they headed to Baja, California, they were in severe emaciation before they even started the migratory run south. So when they left here this year, they're showing up all over the place, and particularly you're hearing stories of them in San Francisco bays each year for the last number of years, and they never went there. They never go there. That's off their migratory route, but they're going there in desperation, looking for food, and they're getting hit by ships there. But what you're going to hear is, we got to come up with laws because whales are dying by ship strikes. But the whales are too weak to get out of the way of the ships. The whales that are being struck by the ships would have died shortly later from severe emaciation anyway, starvation. But your media is completely, there's a lot of people out there that are dependent upon the government, and the government and the nuclear industry are very powerful entities, and so they control the narratives. So San Francisco Bay, they don't belong there. Recently, while sailing with friends on San Francisco Bay, enjoyed the sight of harbor porpoises, cormorants. I don't believe the cormorants belong there, do they? The pelicans, the seals, the sea lions, they're more of a West Coast bird. And then the sprouting plume and glistering black of a gray whale that gave me pause. Too many have been seen inside the bay recently. Well, they don't belong in the bay. They never went there before. There's also a major tourist attraction during the annual 12,000-mile round-trip migration between the Arctic and their breeding lagoons in Baja, California. Over the last 9 years, the eastern gray whale population has crashed, plummeting by more than half to 12,950. Well, if 4 or 5 months ago, the numbers were 14,000 had died, and 13,000 were left. And I doubt highly that it's 12,950 left, and that the species of the gray whales, now it's not just the gray whales that have this particular attributes we're talking about, it's all species. We're looking at an extinction event, and it's time to have a conversation about it, because you're going to have it soon anyway, whether you want to or not. The eastern gray whale population has crashed, plummeting by more than half. Now, their version is to blame it on climate change, which is 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. That's what climate change actually is. 80 years of radioactive fallout. And so that's a complicated story, the radioactive fallout. Let me show it to you again. So anthropogenic man-made radiation is the only emissions that create plumes that covers the entire planet. The model up there is 20 days, and this is 21 days. So these are plutonium. All the animals will get 3 tumors, and they'll all die from those tumors within a few years after the initial exposure. If they have a controlled exposures, right? Multiple studies. We covered it a bit last night. We'll probably cover it a bit tomorrow night, or not tomorrow night, because it's my last show of the week. But we're gonna pick back up on this on Sunday. There's some historical variations in the populations. The grey whales can grow 50 feet long, weigh 80,000 pounds, and are now regularly starving to death. See, when you say as their main food source disappears, well, their food source is disappeared. It's been disappeared for 7-8 years now, the majority of it, and that we've been cataloging this post Fukushima. We've never seen any of these attributes, anything like this ever in history pre Fukushima. As their main food source disappears, which is the same food source for the majority of the whales. And if it's not, then that food source is the food source for the species that the rest of the majority of the whales are going to eat. Right? They're dependent upon the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the carbon sequestration chain, and the oxygen chain, and the zooplankton and the microscopic animals that are feeding the tiny shrimp-like animals. Can't survive without the same, the food. You're talking about the basis of the food chain. So when you break that, that's ripple effect now is undeniable. We're seeing it also in the bird species. And where I'm to, they're supposed to have 46 million migratory birds. They haven't showed up for the last 4 or 5 years. They've been coming here for millions of generations. So they're not gone somewhere else, they're gone. They starve to death, same as the whale. But the whales have a lot more fat than a bird. They have a lot more blubber than the birds, right? So they're going to last a lot longer. But ultimately now we're at the end of the line. This is the end times for the species. All the big whales are dependent upon the same species. And this is why we're seeing it symmetrical throughout the whale population. The whale population is the biggest canary in this radioactive fallout mine. Malnourished, emaciated, and starving, emaciated whales are producing fewer offspring. Well, the offsprings are not surviving. These humpback, both of the 2 bottom pictures are 2 years old. So they were probably born healthy. They used up the resources that the mother whale had, but they weren't able to find food to continue that. And so they slowly, and we've never seen any of this, the pictures, we've never seen any of that before in history. There was no surviving grey whales, of course, but that's true for what we're seeing for almost all the species. Between 2019 and 2025, at least 1,200 whales were stranded dead along the west coast. That don't mean that's the only spot where they're dying. And you're only going to find at best maybe 10%. That's the consensus. That's the acceptable, right? That's the acceptable number that scientists agree upon. It's 8 times greater than any previous 10-year average. Well, pre-Fukushima, there was no average. Very rare, once or twice a year in North America, you might find a whale. And the reason was because they would sink, right? And they would be consumed by the species. But now, the whales that are washing up on the coastlines in numbers that have never been imagined. There's no horror movies that even suggested it. You won't see predators feeding on the whales. You won't see the whales breaking down the way that they would break down pre-Fukushima, because the bacteria, the fungus, and the biota is not there either to break them down. That's 8 times greater than any previous 10-year average. That's a completely dishonest statement to frame it that way, because the die-off started post-Fukushima when we broke the food chain. And because we're 15 years down the road, you can kind of say something like that because you're including a 15-year cycle, but you can't go back pre-Fukushima and include that 10 years because that doesn't exist. Right? There was the normal ebb and flow of the life cycle of life itself. The emaciated whales, these are not hungry whales, these are emaciated, and now come into crowded estuaries like San Francisco Bay to feed. Well, they're not feeding there. There's no food there. They're looking for food, which makes them vulnerable to ship traffic. Well, they're going to die anyway from severe emaciations. 9 in the bay were killed by ship strikes last year, while another 12 died of starvation. Well, if 12 died of starvation and they all eat the same food at the same time in the same migratory route, they were all emaciated. And the emaciated were too tired to get out of the way of the ships. Right, so it's very dishonest the way this person wrote it. But there's a reason that they wrote it like that, and you'll see it at the end of the story. 9 in the bay were killed by ship strikes, while 12 appeared to die of starvation. Appear. Right, so they're putting in this, maybe, right? Because a lot of people don't understand these incredible nuances, the significances of them. If you're emaciated, you're emaciated. If you got a peanut head, if you got shoulder blades sticking up, if you got your rib cages are sticking out, if you have no blubber, this is not up for debate. This is clearly visible because they're such big creatures. So instead of like the blue whale, instead of weighing 380,000 pounds, it weighs 30,000 pounds. And you can see clearly all the bones. That's the end of the species. We're looking, within a couple of years, the species will be gone. In Baja, California, since 2006, when we started going there would be 400 adult whales in the lagoon at any given time, including 100 moms and their babies. He said, this year we saw 100 adults, only 5 of which were mommy-baby pairs. Workers came to the lagoon and ate a couple of the babies because there was not enough adult whales to fend them off. The orcas came in the bay to eat the babies because there's no food for the orcas, which are there's food out there, but it's so difficult for them to find it, right? Unless they're in the right places. But that's disappearing now. There's still food out there. The majority of the reason the whales are dying of starvation is also because they bioaccumulated so much radiation. They have leukemias and cancers. They can't uptake the nutrition. But it's also starvation. They're not finding anything in their stomachs. Such a heartbreaking story, unfortunately. It's beyond unfortunate. It's an extinction event. That's the only way we can describe what we're looking at. The loss of the Arctic sea ice and refusal of the world's nations recently gathered at Conference of Parties 30 Climate Summit, which is UN, which shouldn't exist, and which might not even exist. The United States just officially today pulled out of the World Health Organization, thank goodness, which they're one of the biggest funders of, which is $250 or $260 billion a year, or $1 million a year, which is weaponized against humanity. The United Nations is 195 militaries. Ask North Korea. They have no redeeming qualities. UN should not exist. They were the League of Nations pre-Nagasaki, Hiroshima, right? Well, I'm not going to cover that tonight, but... So if you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, the story author wants you to believe that you can change the starvation of all the whales, which is absurdness. The greenhouse gas emissions don't make plumes that covers the entire planet like radiation do. And wherever the carbon lands, you got more birds, more whales, more insects, more plants, more phytoplankton, more shrimp, more trees, more fruit. It's the recycling of life. Carbon is life recycling. But you got to realize the industry does has millions and millions and millions and millions of studies on radioactive fallout. And so they're very powerful, very influential. They have no dissenting voices in the media. And so their narrative, which is completely dishonest and disingenuous, is absorbed by the population that is gullible enough to participate in that media's, reading that media. Suggested prospects for grey whales and other wildlife, whales and birds and seals and sea lions and walruses and everything else, in our warming seas, which is caused by 80 years of emission and dumpings. You got 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging 24 hours a day into your environment of nuclear emissions. When you take the reactors out and you put them in a fuel pool, there's no containment. It's splitting atoms for millions of homes and businesses with no containment, so it's going directly into your atmosphere and poisoning everything. There's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. Including key food species for humans such as salmon, cod, and herrings are look grim. So what they're saying is you can almost, in a few years, there'll be no cod, no salmon, no herrings. And so what is going to be the world's reaction to the die-off of all the species, to the annihilation that we're looking at? Because the majority of the planet has no concept this is about to be a thing, right? That, well, the whales are gone in a couple of years. Almost all the grey whales will be gone in 2 years. I won't be surprised if they don't make the southerly run 2026. Right, they're headed north right now. But, they were emaciated last year when they were headed north. They were emaciated, severe, heartbreaking when he headed south last year, and the absurd amount of them had died. The remainder, which is less than 13,000, are showing up everywhere in severe emaciation, dead in severe emaciation. And ones that we don't see, of course, we're only seeing at best, and we're not even seeing 10%. Because when they lose all their fat, all of their blubber, all their muscles, and they die, they sink right away. They don't wash up on beaches. So the ones that were alive when they went up there. And that's the majority are not showing up on the beaches, but they are dying. And it's not just the grey whales. Whales that have been hunted once for oil are falling victims to the effects of petroleum and rock oil. It's not petroleum and rock oil that is killing the species. It's radiation fallout broke the food chain. Petroleum and rock oil is natural. The earth has always hemorrhaged that stuff into the environment. And you got to realize the ocean was 1 billion creatures per glass of water. The burning of oil, coal, and gas are now overheating our blue planet. It doesn't work that way. This overheats your planet. It overheats it by breaking down the life cycle, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain in the ocean, but it wrecks the bacteria, the fungus, and the biota in your forests and meadows. So they don't soak up water anymore for the roots, because the roots need bacteria and fungus to absorb water so that they can perspire each day in order to self-regenerate their leaves during droughts and stuff like that. The glaciers almost disappeared now worldwide post-Fukushima, so you don't have that cold water running down through all the streams and rivers and lakes and estuaries and coastlines, which regulated the temperatures during droughts and summers. That's gone, and that would keep the levels of these areas high enough that migratory species can get up to lay eggs. They can't do it anymore. They're laying them on the coastlines and the estuaries, which we've historically have never seen. Our own intelligence comes into question when we fail to meet commitments to clean, carbon-free energy future. So David is the executive director of Blue Frontier, an ocean policy group. They're a think tank. And he's doing this for his own benefit, because he's dependent upon investors and donations and everything, which he gets more, and government funding for that organization, right? He has a big incentive to lie to you. His intelligence, because he refuses to acknowledge radiation. Right? And he knows the difference. He's not naive. He's not gullible. He's not unaware. He's completely aware of what I'm telling you. In order for the lie to work, everybody has to be in on it when it comes to Fukushima. Just let me explain how that actually works. It's pretty easy, sadly, which makes it even worse because then the question is, why isn't other people trying to educate you about this, right? Here's a good example. Here's your media. In order for the media, for this story to work, all the media has to participate in the lie, including David, we just showed you, right? But all the media has to participate in the lie and universities for this lie to work. This is just a fraction of the media that are claiming that Fukushima Reactor 4, over to your left, is intact. And this over to your left would be normally a 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story building. But that doesn't exist. Officially, it looks like this. And like that, like that, like that. And I can play you these videos. This is just a screen capture where they're pretending they're on top of the building. But that lie only works because the media doesn't come out and say, folks, CNN, ABC Australia, BBC, and CBS are lying to you. It actually looks like that. Nobody's going to do that. The media is going to say that they're on top of the building, right? And so this could be the grey whale's last best hope if there is any. Well, there isn't any. When the whales are shown up in last stage emaciation from starvation, it took them several years to get to that stage. Even if they find food today, it's not going to be enough to restore that health, right? You can't survive what's going on. And so this person who wrote that article is a disgusting parasite. That's the best way to describe that guy, as a parasite. So there's been 7,000 humpback whales in 2016 that showed up that were considered missing, had died. And the assertion was they died of starvation. Which is an incredible assertion. I'll just try to grab that for you here real quick and just so you got something to work with it. And these are my least favorite shows. It's the same thing with the grey whales. The starvation is... Now, they're trying to blame it on the heat wave. Remember that song that I started off with, The Scientists and Their Blob? And I put a link in the description for that. Hello, everybody. Let's keep it rolling here. Let me just bring up the poll one more time. As whales vanish from all oceans, should Fukushima radioactive fallout be declared a extinction event? And what else could you call that, really? Did a marine heat wave cause, this is a question, 7,000 humpback whales, just 2016, and they're eating the same food as the grey whales and the blue whales and the mink whales and the sperm whales. They're all dependent upon that source to either grow the food that they eat or they eat that directly. 7,000 humpback whales starved to death. Now, for that to happen, right, for 7,000 whales to starve to death, that took several years. And their food source had disappeared. And they were going long migratory routes, but they couldn't find any substance, any food to maintain their blubber or their fat or their muscle. So they can, it's amazing that they can survive as long as they did. So this mammal died from blunt force injury, but when you're looking at the body, that's emaciation. And sure, it can die of blunt force trauma, but it wasn't blunt force trauma, it was emaciation. So this whale should weigh 160,000 pounds. Does that look like it's 160,000 pounds? So you're looking at a severe just catastrophic emaciation. This one was 2021, August the 31st. And so I'm just trying to establish, you'll see some of these stories showing up, they're several years old, just to show you that this is ongoing, which means it ain't going to change, which means the whales will be gone in just a couple of years. And that's not up for debate. And so you're looking at a peanut head, you can see the shoulder blades, you can see there's no body mass there. It maybe weighs, let's say it weighs 35,000 pounds. These are very big whales, right? Very long, a lot of bones. Their heads are actually very, very large, very heavy, the bone structure. I've actually dove on the skeletons of them. They're huge. And the skin weighs a lot, right? But it's still missing 120,000 pounds, say, which is the blubber, the fat, and the muscle mass is gone. So now, unfortunately, almost every single story, if we get any sensible videos or pictures, this is what we're seeing, is severe emaciation. And, I go through the fin whale is the second biggest whale on the planet. They can grow 65 to 85 feet. So he's 57 feet. So he's almost a full-size whale. And so in 80 feet, at 2,000 a ton each, right, is 160,000 pounds. So when you look at this whale, let's say it's missing, it's not full grown, so it only weighs 140,000 instead of 160. It's almost a full adult, right? It's a couple of feet shy, so because they're emaciated, they definitely could have shrunk. That's severe emaciation. Almost every single whale, if you got more than one picture, you're able to pretty quickly establish that it's severe emaciation. And that's crazy. That's heartbreaking. That's the worst case scenario. Later that day, the whale was alive. This whale was actually alive when it came ashore, which is absurd to me. But because the ocean is able to buoyancy it, if it died at sea, it would have sank right away because it has no body fat, no muscles, no blubber. In necropsy, animal autopsy, it was indeed a debilitated animal suffering from underlying conditions. It had a thin body and an empty stomach. Well, it had an empty stomach for the last couple of years in order to be that emaciated. It didn't eat for a couple of years because these are the giants of the sea, right? And they're genetically programmed to do a migratory route. They've been doing it for millions of generations. It's programmed into them. A drunk fisherman climbs onto a floating dead whale, strikes a yo-yo pose for the camera. Luckily, it didn't explode. So that story went viral a couple of days ago. Two men can be seen trying to climb onto the whale carcass from a fishing boat, a small, like a 20-foot fishing boat, in the viral clip. And that bothers me that they go viral, and that wasn't an accident. They want people to be angry that humans will go near an animal. They want you to stay away from the animals because if you get pictures of the stuff I'm showing you like this, and they decide they're going to try to hide it, they can't hide it anymore because you put pictures like this up on social media, and people like me, and there's not many people, there's just less than 5 people I know worldwide that are honest about this topic. That is the most frightening statement imaginable. Now this whale is decomposing. So just because it looks fairly round there, that's gas. I can't imagine there's a whale out there that's healthy after everything we've covered for almost 15 years. I've never seen a healthy whale, particularly, say, in the last 6 or 7 years. Because, like, if you take a picture at the right angle, you can make an emaciated whale look reasonable, right? But if you get a full shot where you can see whether there's rib cages, whether shoulder blades are visible, whether there's a peanut head, which are all, if you see any of those signs, you're looking at an emaciated animal. And see these close pictures, you can't tell the significance because you're looking at the top part instead of. Grizzly bears go vegetarian due to climate change, chosen berries over salmon. Well, they typically eat 200,000 berries a day. They eat grub, they eat moose, they eat elk, they eat caribou, they eat deer too, right? They eat other bears. Not just salmon. They'll eat. They're very predatory animals. And now the problem with the berries is berries are one of the worst things you can eat, unfortunately, because they bioaccumulate radioactive fallout. And when you're eating 200,000 a day, it is going to come back and haunt you. Photographer of horribly thin polar bear hopes to inspire climate change fight. Now, CBC is a government media in Canada. They're some of the worst humans conceivable on top of that. This is the bear. This bear has got a really interesting story. It swam for 700 miles before it finally died, looking for food. 700 miles. In a place where there should be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of seals, for instance. They couldn't find anything. This is another severely emaciated bear. I know what you're thinking, Dana, that's a bear rug. No, that's an actual grizzly bear. And a grizzly bear can typically like 12, 14 feet high when it stands up. And that is massive animal. This is up in Norway. They were in search of polar bears. We didn't find any sea ice, and we never found any bears that were alive. We found 2 dead bears in this location. Other groups found more dead bears. Their bears were so skinny, they appeared to die of starvation. I don't know why they put the word appeared to. Clearly, they died of starvation. In all of my years of growing up in the Arctic and later working as a biologist, I've never found a dead polar bear. Now becoming much more common. And we get polar bears we're onto. It's not unusual a couple of decades ago to have a polar bear walk within a few miles we're onto currently. They don't survive because people will kill it, right? Because they're such a predator. The record-breaking polar bear spur climate change concerns. They're talking about this polar bear here. In 2014, hungry and skinny, emaciated. Calling it skinny is completely dishonest. It's an emaciated bear. It's starving to death. Raised concerns about the word climate change is a weapon used against you. Climate change is a direct result of almost 80 years of radioactive fallout destroying the ecosystem. Just give me a second. I got a light that's giving me a hard time. I'm going to turn it off. I changed out the one above me. Anyway, I got it pointed up, and I think it's just a dial on it or something. I switched out the one above me because it's from the ceiling. It's 600 LEDs. After broke the record for the longest underwater dive with a remarkable time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds, the bear smashed the previous record of 72 seconds and swam almost 150 feet, 50 meters without coming up from air. Wow. And you can see the female polar bear swam for about 700 kilometers over a 9-day period. They followed it on a research vessel. that the taxpayers should take away from them. And in the same time, there was this video, and this is really difficult stuff to look at, but there was around 3,000 polar bears like this in that same period. I'm going to play that video. I'm going to get it out of the way. But this is severe emaciation. It's only a short video. I'm going to shut up for a second, and then I'll be right back. Pre-Fukushima, we've never seen anything like this. There's around 3,000 during this period that were beyond. And so you're not seeing any insects around them. You're not seeing any other species. You won't see any species. Let me go backwards for a second. You see this animal here? There was no predators, no foxes or Arctic animals that took advantage of that. There was no wolves or anything like that that consumed it, that tore it apart. It's in perfect shape. Like, I don't mean that, because obviously it's not, but it hasn't been disturbed. There was nothing there to break it down on top of that, see? The polar bear photo that shocked the world and what it really means. Again, whenever they imposed, without the documentations to quantify their assertions, polar bears lose sea ice due to, they say, climate change. Well, what is climate change? It's 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry covering your planet. Carbon doesn't cause climate change. It's absurd to suggest it could or it do. It's absurd to suggest that carbon, which you can't have any birds or insects or mammals or animals or anything else, is somehow going to cause climate change. It's absurd. 80 years of radioactive fallout, so it's hard to comprehend what you're looking at. Think of a snowstorm that covers the planet, and it does that, say, in 20 days. Now, it never stops snowing, and the snow never goes away. That's what radiation is. But radiation, instead of a snowflake being a snowflake, the radioactive atom is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, and it wrecks everything it comes into contact with. There's nothing after a replicating cells is able to defend against it. So because you're snuffing out the entire planet with radioactive fallout. So that model is only based on March the 18th, and it's based on Fukushima, for instance. And Fukushima was March 11th to April the 7th. So less than a month later, the whole planet was covered in radioactive fallout. But all the national institutions of the different isotopes are showing us the same thing, forcing them to fast longer and lose body fat, leading to emaciation. The time of the polar bears. They're not fasting, they're starving. They're not losing the body fat, they're starving to death. And the emaciation is the result of no food. And because like they're foragers, they'll eat the berries will make it worse because of the bioaccumulation of the radiation in their bodies. It's tied to the polar bear's future with projections of reproduction failure by 2040. And possible extinctions by 2100. Well, the extinction is before 2030. In the next 5 years, there'll be no polar bears, there'll be no whales, and most likely no seals or sea lions. Stuff, dolphins and porpoises, and there's not going to be no, we've already gone through a couple of these stages post-Fukushima where there was no survival of seals, baby seals, where the entire colonies of common murres, for instance, have showed up severely emaciated. At the same time as Cassini auklets were showing up emaciated. So there was like 1.4 million Cassini auklets and over 1 million common murres from British Columbia, Alaska to Alaska showed up emaciated. And what that meant was you had two different spectrums of the food chain, because the common murres, they dive 600 feet all day to eat anchovies and sardines and krill and shrimp and small fish, right? Whereas the Cassini auchlitz is eating the microscopic, the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, the pods and stuff like the microscopic animals. So two different spectrums of the food chain showing up at the same time in severe emaciation. Now the tidal zones were wiped out. We were doing research expeditions at that time for almost 6 years. And reproductive failure is now, we're in late stage now. It's not going to be 2040. They'll be long gone before that. Extinction is by 2030 at the latest. And that's not up for debate. We got the documentation. We've been covering this for 15 years. So this picture, as far as I can tell, is not real. And see the picture, and let me come over to my other, let me zoom in on this stuff. When you zoom in on the top picture, I'll get it in your eye socket here right now. So when you're looking at that picture right there, look at that animal. That is supposed to be this animal here. Well, they're not the same animal, right? That animal up there doesn't have this attribute. But see the right, the way the animal stood up there and this animal stood here, they're almost identical, right? In the way they're and then you got water behind it. But you can see the rocks are missing. That little island up there is missing from this picture right here. I can only do it this way by zooming back and forth. So these are not the same animal. As far as and so this is a couple of years ago, I believe. Let me go backwards for 1 second. Is there a date on this? 2025, December the 5th. So clearly, right, this is not the same animal, but that's what they're claiming it is, and that's why it's highlighted in the red. It's not the same animal. So it's misrepresentation in order to try to invoke climate change narrative, right? As whales vanish from all oceans, should Fukushima radioactive fallout be declared an extinction event? So when you're looking at this animal, like if it was real, trust me, I would say it. Of course, it's not. The animal up in the top is stood on grass or some kind of moss or something. That animal is not in the same position. It was originally taken December 2017, they're saying. Although some AI-generated replicas exist, the original photo was taken. And I think the original photo is the one up in the top left-hand corner. And that this is the AI-generated, meant to invoke a certain response from people that were gullible enough to trust these people. A polar bear suffering, image which reached 2.5 billion views in 2023, shows an emaciated polar bear barely clinging to life. So that was dishonest what they done there. Like we've seen a lot of severely emaciated animals, and believe you me, if I thought that was real, I would go along with the story. But when you look at a severely emaciated animal, and here's another one, and of course the video, we are not seeing, because they have so much fur, and the structure of their fur is designed, we're not, he's going to die or she's going to die within a few days, this animal right there, right? So we're not seeing the rib cage, the bone structures. Now whales, we'll see them get to this stage because they don't have to carry their weight the same way, right? As an animal on land has to carry their weight. And then, of course, National Geographic's, which is Rupert Murdoch. Why would you want to trust him for? It was titled, "This is what climate change looked like." And so if you can count on somebody being just a scumbag, it's Rupert Murdoch's media. Here's what climate change is. It's 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry, destroyed the biota, the fungus, the bacteria on land, and it destroyed the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, in all waters, not just the oceans. In just less than a month, all oceans, all fresh water was tritiated. Everything. All the streams, all the rivers, all the estuaries, everything was contaminated. And it's still hemorrhaging out of Japan. And from Windscale, and from Hanford, for instance, and from many other places, right? All the national laboratories, the different countries. Well, National Geographic later said that it had taken the narrative too far, and the picture. Experts chimed in with other causes for the beer's diminished state. One theory was the beer had cancer. And of course it has cancer, and it didn't look like that. They all got it. It's from radiation. And others feel the beer may have been just old in the final stages of life. But it was actually all 3,000 Arctic beers were in last stages. And it wasn't the first. And we showed you this picture of that highlighted link that I got up right there. It was this picture here. This was the beer that swam for 700 miles, was followed by a government research vessel, and then was weaponized against us. The photographers speculated climate change. Climate change is 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry, 80 years of dumping, 80 years of emissions from all the fuel pools worldwide splitting atoms into your environment. Every atom ever split from nuclear chain reaction is still out there pulsing energy at the speed of light. Like cesium-137 pulses energy for 600 feet. So it can destroy your chromosomes, your DNA, and cells of every species within 600 feet for 300 years. Your body tries to repair that every second. This story we covered before, but it came out again. Narwhale recently found in Ireland suggests they're moving into new areas. No, it means they can't find food in their own area. And this particular narwhale is severe emaciation again. He said she wasn't emaciated. Why would you say something like that? She wasn't in good condition, but she wasn't emaciated. Why would you say that? Only the British would be arrogant, and Australia would be arrogant, and Canada would be arrogant enough to say something like that. She wasn't in good condition, but she wasn't emaciated, because all the whales showing up there are emaciated. And this whale went there in desperation looking for food, and it doesn't belong there. So maybe, which is a conjecture, is an opinion, the live stranding killed her. Of course it did. It couldn't float anymore, so it strands themselves. That's why they strand, is because they can't keep their blowhole out of the water so they can breathe. That's the last stage. And then the picture, and when they only gave you one, well, we have other pictures of it originally, but it was emaciated. Regardless of what caused the death, you were shocked to see it on the Irish beach. I mean, regardless of what caused, why would you say that? Why would you frame it that way? Regardless. Because you're trying to, like, oh, well, she wasn't emaciated. Regardless, she doesn't belong there, blah, blah, blah. It's just a completely dishonest way to approach the story. But see, because the locals got the pictures of it, they come up with these stories to try to downplay it. When you start adding all of this stuff together, you're left with this impression that we are in real trouble. Excuse me. Whales triggers of wider change in our marine environment. Narwhal whales typically inhabit the Arctic water, and some have reportedly been seen elsewhere in Europe, including in Belgium, of all places, in 2016, post-Fukushima. When a dead male narwhal washed up on the shore, we get them here, right? But they're natural down here, of a river, on the shores of a river, fresh water, which is a phenomenon we've only seen post-Fukushima, and we've seen quite a bit of it, which means that's desperation, and they're always emaciated, the ones that show up in the rivers. He believes that the lapdog for the industry believes the animals found in Ireland could indicate they may be moving into new areas. Listen, they do what they do for millions of generations. Why would they change it? And a bowhead whale, which could live to over 200 years, was also seen in 2016 in Ireland, because you can't find food in their normal migratory route. Like the Irish whale and dolphin group are just terrible people. These are terrible people. They're the most dishonest people imaginable. And they get a lot of money from the government, right? She wasn't in good condition, but she wasn't emaciated. Yeah, she was emaciated. If she wasn't emaciated, you would have showed us pictures to prove it. We already got the pictures from the month before. She was emaciated. And when you bring up Fisheries and Oceans Canada, DFO, what would you even talk to them for? Well, that's because we originally would find them in Canada here. They have been found in St. Lawrence from 2016 to 2023, where they don't belong. Right, the beluga whale, I seen him up there. We'll see him up there. And I've dove to St. Lawrence. At one point, I think there was something like 400,000 seals there when I was diving there. That was pre-Fukushima, obviously. From 2016 to 2023, again, they don't belong there. So this is me when I was living on the West Coast. And these are my research vessels. And what I'd done was I went from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska year after year after year post-Fukushima doing species counts. And the species to your left are exterminated. So I had to go back multiple years to see if the species to your left recovered. The species to your left never came back. And what that means is you've got an extinction event, because a glass of ocean water would typically have 1 billion creatures in a single glass of water. And 75 to 100 million would be the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. The rest of it would have been eggs and larvae and microscopic creatures of these species, right? And then in 2016, when all the whales were dying of starvation, they were saying all the species in the tidal zones were dying of cancer. It was like a virus spreading from one species to another species. So the reason the species on your left, these on the right is my research expeditions, when the species on the left are saying cancer was spreading from one species to another species, and that's why they disappeared. Cancer doesn't do that. Cancer is not a virus. The species to your left have been there for millions of generations. They're exterminated. And we went back for 5 extra years to see if they recovered. There was no recovery. They were exterminated. This is due to Fukushima. All of these attributes are post-Fukushima. It would have happened without Fukushima eventually, because the nuclear industry is hemorrhaging radiation from 1,000 fuel pools full of reactor cores into your environment. Every year there's more reactor cores going into fuel pools with no containment, splitting atoms into your environment. It can only end up as an extinction event. But Fukushima was a pulse event with multiple reactor cores that were stored at the top of the buildings were lost into the environment and particulates. The particulates are splitting atoms. So imagine you've got a snowstorm covers the planet in 20 days. And each snowflake will split itself in two every second and create another snowflake. Every second. That's what Fukushima done, but it done it with radiation. So the species to your left now, officially, are exterminated. We know that because I was there year after year after year, and I used to be a commercial diver on that coastline. I'm very familiar with all the species. I worked there for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours underwater. So I'm very familiar with all of this. I'm not naive, I'm not gullible, I'm not mistaken. I'm very methodical in providing the documentation for all of my assertions on top of that. And when I was talking about the radiation, all the bomb testing, all the nuclear dumping, all the munitions they use in war, like the A-10 Warthog only shoots dirty bombs, but it's not just the A-10 Warthog that shoots the dirty bombs, the Dulram, the depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material, which is harmful to everything with replicating cells. So this is Lorraine Moret, a person I deeply admire for a very long time, for over a couple of decades, and has been one of my heroes, to say the least. She died recently. This is her doing a presentation after a conference in Hamburg, Germany. And they're talking about the Dulram, the depleted uranium. And it's quite startling. She's going to talk about just a single conflict of how much was used. And I'll be right back. It's a short video. It's extraordinarily important. You'll find it in my videos section, not my live section, if you want to download it for your own collection. I'll be right back.
Estimates of depleted uranium weapons used in 1991 now range. Estimates of depleted uranium weapons used in 1991 now range from the Pentagon's admitted 325 tons, and that's only bullets, to other scientific bodies who put the figure as high as 900 tons. A Warthog shoots 1.5 tons of bullets in 1 minute. In the 2003 Gulf War, estimates of 2,200 tons have been given. One of the Japanese physicists who came to our Hamburg conference calculated that 800 tons of depleted uranium, if it's released into the air, is the atomicity equivalent, or the equivalent number of radioactive atoms, as 41,000 Nagasaki bombs. We have released over 250,000 Nagasaki bombs, equivalent radiation, into our atmosphere. But what's even more alarming is that the McAllister bomb factory in Oklahoma, McAllister, Oklahoma, was applying for relicensing at the NRC in order to be able to continue manufacturing DU weapons. And in order to maintain level 1 status, which they have to do to get relicensed, they must be able to ship 1,600 tons of depleted uranium weapons a day. That's 166,000 Nagasaki bombs of radiation. It's 20 train car loads of DU going out of that factory every day. It's only one of 4 U.S. Army bomb factories. And altogether, at all 4 bomb factories at any one time, they are allowed by the NRC to have up to 44,000 tons of DU on site. That's 4.5 million Nagasaki bombs.
4.5 million Nagasaki bombs worth. Let me just expand on that for 1 second. So the total, if you take the kilotons of all nuclear weapons on the planet that were detonated, it's around 35,000 Nagasaki bombs. And when they talk about low-level waste, that will wipe out the insects. It'll stop them from reproducing. That'll give everybody all kinds of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . I just want to expand on that first. That facet to make sure everybody got a really good comprehension of why this is such a nightmare. The only problem is I got so much stuff sometimes. It makes it a little harder for me. And it's important, so just bear with me 1 second. I'll hopefully find it. Normally I don't have... Oh, there it is. I got to relabel it, but if I label it, then I make it easier for me. It means the stuff that I have in my collection might not work, right? I can't find it right now. I don't know why. Sometimes I'll find it, sometimes I can't find it. But well, anyway, there was a contract to get rid of United States because they're going to replace their depleted uranium munitions. And just one contract. Oh, there it is. The headlines. Just one contract. I'll find it now. Here it is. So the A-10 Warthog shoots 1.5 tons a minute of dirty bombs, right? Here we go. So A-10 Warthog. All it shoots is dirty bombs, folks, and 1.5 tons a minute. So they were trying to get rid of 35.7 million munitions with a core. These are not coated and not tipped. These are pure uranium. Dulram. How do you dispose of a dirty bomb, right? Like there is no repository for even low-level waste, and this stuff is contaminated with the full range of isotopes, and that's why Lorraine Moret had conflated it with a Nagasaki bomb, because the Nagasaki bomb is a plutonium bomb, where the Hiroshima bomb was uranium bomb. So in Belgium, not only did they find a whale at the Melander, this is one of the 26 killer whales in Argentina a couple of months ago. The biggest die-off of killer whales worldwide we've ever seen happened. And the pictures they released after this, because they found these two, there was two of them, but you can see the shoulder blades, you can see the animal is emaciating. But the pictures of the other 24 animals were terrible pictures. You can see some of their tails were flat, which is severe emaciation. Japan times there could be hot spots under the ocean. Well, when the reactors exploded, they ejected their reactor cores. In reactor 3, for instance, was very visible. I'll just play that first part of the explosion. This was 9 reactor cores. Each reactor core was 100 Chernobyls. So TEPCO was known to be coating the ocean floor with cement mixture because they lost the inventories, but they covered it up successfully, right? They actually covered it up. And so looking for gamma when you should be looking for, which, typically they're just looking for cesium, but you should be looking for the curium isotopes, which is the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rods. So Dr. Janet Sherman and Joseph Magano, who's still alive, but Janet's not, she died last year, I think it was, had done a study where they found 14,000, a spike of heart attack deaths in the United States post-Fukushima in the first couple of weeks of an extra 14,000 people compared to any other year in that month, which corresponded and they were expecting to find, and they did, right? But then they updated that to 20,000, but that wasn't like covering the United States in total. That was just covering a fraction of United States territory. So we knew the reactors lost their inventories. We knew the radioactive fallout had covered the planet. We knew the health effects in North America in humans were catastrophic. We had all kinds of documentations, right, to back up everything that, we had covered it extensively, say, up to that point. So when I was doing the research expeditions, one of the odd things about it was that, now that's right by, I'm 10 miles from Alaska right there. That's Lucy Island. That's where I got injured as a diver when I was young, as a commercial diver. I was diving on the other side of that, which is the open Pacific Ocean, right? I'm in shelter right here. And same as right here, you're sheltered. You're on the inside. And there's 27,000 islands, right? So you're still up in the nightmare area, but and at that time of the year, you had to do the backsides of the islands, which didn't matter. You're doing the backside of the islands. And you already know what it should look like. And there's my trusty sidekick, Zoe. I miss her, something terrible about this. She died of a heart attack, stroke, when I was out looking for birds on a research expedition. This is the starfish that I was finding. When I did find them, there wasn't very many. It was only a couple of species. Look at the severe tumors. You're looking at cancer tumors. And Zoe, man, she was really something, right? She was the only color on the beaches. Instead of 700 algae, there was only 3 typically. There was the bull kelp, which is what you're looking at. There was kelp cabbage and kelp weed. And kelp weed, of course, is popular in all oceans. But almost every single starfish, you didn't find very many. Like in a 4 or 5 month trip, if you found 100, that was amazing. And they were always significantly deformed and disfigured. So that species in particular is the same as, they're the exact same, they come in multiple colors. So that one, this one, and you can see it doesn't even look like a starfish. It's just bizarre. It's some kind of bizarre looking creature, right? Same as this one. I couldn't go up on those beaches, but you didn't need to. We know what it's supposed to look like. I showed you that earlier. I'll show you a little bit more again, right? And we put this operation together. And that little Zodiac, I can go the whole week on 2.5 gallons, 3 gallons. And whereas this one burns 9 gallons an hour. And so the species, we know what the tidal zone should look like to your left. We're quite familiar with all of this. And we didn't find any of those species. But it meant you had to go up and continue to document it to see if that changed, right? And because it's such a visual, beautiful, incredible coastline, there should be 700 algae, and those 700 algae should be 5,500 invertebrates without the backbones. That was one of the closest we got to an actual starfish, but it's still disfigured. It was bizarre to find any kind of, I only found this 3 or 4 times in a 6-year period. And what was interesting was, because there's a 19-foot tide exchange, there's 30,000 insects at that high tide line, and all the other creatures from the forest and the 27,000 islands. It was pretty interesting that nothing consumed that. There was no birds consuming that. There was no birds in the harbors at nighttime. No matter where I was too, there was no birds. It was only, well, that's a lie. There was, we got caught off the west coast of Vancouver Island once, and there was one bird came in and slept right alongside of me, so to speak. He looked barely alive. And for the sea anemones, it should be around 84 species. Each species comes in multiple vibrant colors. This was the giant sea plume, usually like a green, a brown, or a white. And typically white is the most visible you would see. And I used to judge that when because you got 27,000 islands, but you got 3 million, 10 million rocks that are just below the surface that could disable your boat or sink it, right? Or capsize you in swells and stuff like that. And it was very, very, very unusual to find even these. And these were if I did find any kind of sea anemones, there was only 2 kind I found out of the 84 species they were missing. And because I was by myself, I was out there for months and months at a time. I just took my time and meandered. I was in no rush because it was a difficult operation for many, many reasons. Logistically, it was a nightmare. You got to have all the parts and fuels, and you got to have all the equipment. You got to have ice. There's so many. You couldn't find any normal species. Normally, you can come into these tidal zones and there'd be abalone and scallops and oysters. There's all kinds of supplementary food, right? Not that I would eat anything after Fukushima. If you're going to eat anything out of the ocean, it have to be a fish. Don't eat shellfish, because they bioaccumulate radiation 125,000 times more than a fish does. And so if you really want to play Russian roulette, go eat a bowl of shellfish, because they're filter feeders. I call it cancer in a bowl, personally. You never get me near it. It's irresponsible to even... I don't even want to be in the same oil as shellfish because they bioaccumulate so much radiation. The gamma shine alone would be brutal in the supermarket oil. So kelp eelgrass is very unusual to see, which shouldn't be, right? It should be everywhere. That was unusual too, so I got pictures. And you can see, I almost see a starfish up there, and I think that's the starfish. There was around 70 species of sponges. So the red you're seeing on a rock up there, a little bit of red, that's a couple of sponges. But typically they would be everywhere, as I showed you the other pictures. Right, so it should look like this. It should be beautiful. It shouldn't be brutally, severely. I only found mussels in 2 or 3 spots where every rock, if it doesn't have something, it should have mussels on it, minimum, and large barnacles. The barnacles we did find were extraordinary. And you see my pictures of my boat, my little Zodiac up on the beaches. Normally you would never put a soft bottom Zodiac on a beach, right? It's completely irresponsible, because you would punch holes in it right away with the barnacles and everything. These barnacles, if you rub your boot along it, they'll just break right off, which was extraordinary. We've never seen that before. And at the high tide line, it should be 30,000 insects they were missing. It's a non-natural coastline. There was no smell. There was no noise. At nighttime, when you would shine your flashlight on the shorelines, you expect to see all kinds of eyeballs looking back at you. From just, say, crabs alone, not counting the species in the forest, there would be nothing there. And when you look down in water like this, it should be much brighter with the joint sea plume anemones. They should stand out. I always use them as a marker, right? So when I'm going in shallow water, I'm looking for the joint sea plume anemones to know there's a rock there and I don't strike it, right? And that was the end or beginning of my typical day where I'm running out. I was very dedicated. I was obsessed with getting as much research and field studies punched in as I could each year, because it was very difficult to put the whole operation together, keep it working, and actually get out on the ocean. And again, I was completely fixated on getting the job done. Thank goodness. Thank goodness is all I can say. Thank goodness that we managed to make it work for as long as we did. And now we're struggling, but that doesn't, there's other ways to supplement, because now we're seeing everything extinct. I don't think we need to prove it anymore personally, but I do like my subconscious wants me out doing field studies all the time. It's very difficult to fund that stuff. It'll take me thousands and thousands of dollars to get back up to speed. I need an engine on the boat. But one thing about me is you got to realize I'm not going to give up. At some point, we're going to be back out there doing the research. There should be none by 2050. So they got, I can't remember how many feral cats in New Zealand. What was the number? The goal to protect the country's unique biodiversity. If you're going to do that, you would come out against Fukushima's. Yeah, 2.5 million feral cats. So any species, they're going to end up eating each other. But any species that survives Fukushima will be devoured. So they're going to have to kill 104,000 a year, which is 285 a day. And I'm not gonna say what's not known, what's not already known. I'm gonna say what's already known is that a feral cat will kill an absurd amount of birds, or cat as a pet left outdoors will kill a lot of creatures. But if it's dependent upon it and it's got a litter of 6 or 7 kittens, which is they have big litters, they can wipe out any migratory birds that are vulnerable. And they're all vulnerable because their immune systems are compromised by radioactive fallout catastrophically post-Fukushima like everybody else. They're not going to kill the people's cats, but thousands of dead creatures found on Snettisham Beach. So it looks like you got a common murder, a seal, a flatfish. We'll see, maybe they've got that. I can't remember the story personally. Because this one is, there's so much of it. I got so much of it in the last number of weeks. You can't keep up with everything. Seal, flatfish, common scooter birds. This is United Kingdom, clearly. Were just some of the animals that have washed up on the coast during the last week. The rough seas. Now, rough seas don't cause species die-offs, okay? The species live in harmony with millions of generations. So they're not going to be impacted. Believed, which is a conjecture, that's an opinion, should be left out of the equation. But it's British, and the British are notorious for just being ruthless scum. Like the media. I love the British people, don't get me wrong. Are believed to be the reason for the death. So rough weather is the reason for the death? It's absurd to suggest that rough weather. I grew up in a community with no automobiles. And I had, a speedboat and a gas account when I was 13 years old. A brand new motor, which was a big deal, outboard motors back in those days, right? You were in the Jetsons age back in those days. And I had a purpose-built little speedboat with a 15 on the back of it. And my job was to go, because we didn't have supermarkets back then. My job was to go out and get seabirds or ducks or stuff like that, or partridge or rabbits, right? Because that's what you ate. You went and got your own food for the most part, right? And you didn't take any more than you were going to use. So as a kid, that was one of my jobs, was to go get food. So I was very fortunate to have the knowledge to know, to understand life, right? The way I was fortunate enough to be able to understand it, particularly my diving. On top of that, taught me that other end of the spectrum, right? They primarily feed on crustaceans, mollusks, and small fish. Very often, stormy weather, you see now, it's true. There are some places. It is true. There are some species that washes up on beach, but you're not going to get multiple species washing up on the same beach from a storm. There's another contributing factor going on there. Thousands of flatfish. Now that shouldn't be happening. But radiation washes down from your mountains and your coastlines into the coastlines. And bottom feeders like flatfish would be more susceptible. Seal carcasses are also regularly seen because they eat the flatfish and other and shellfish, which is a reflection of the booming population. No, United Kingdom's population is decimated. A few years back, they had, in a single year, almost 1,000 covert beak whales wash up on their coastlines. Now, only 10% is accepted numbers scientifically of species that you will find in a die-off, for instance. So, but the 1,000 culverted beaked whales don't belong in that coastline, first off, and he showed up in different stages of decomposition in second, and that the species they're dependent upon, other species that are dependent upon that were also showing up dead, and they were the ones that were able to document like full body that weren't completely because they were showing up in different stages of decomposition. The species that were intact, that were dying, were emaciated. They estimated that, I think it was around 5,000 species in a few year period of whales and seals and sea lions and had washed up on the coastline. So which meant there was around 50,000 of the mammals that had washed up on the coastline. Now because we've been documenting this for a very long time, we're able to appreciate the significance. It wasn't a booming population. That's the furthest thing from the truth. And he said this is a perfectly normal event, and they will provide much needed nutrients for the shorebirds. And again, this is not like a one-off event. This is going on nonstop post Fukushima, and so it's not perfect. It's perfectly normal post Fukushima, but it's not normal pre Fukushima. Despicable thing that they wrote there, and that's what you expect from the British medias and universities and government agencies. You expect absolute despicability, and you're never disappointed. It's unbelievable, eh? How dishonest and disingenuous and deceptive and deceitful these people constantly, perpetually are. I wasn't expecting to make it this far tonight, so I'm pretty proud of myself. But we got such a amount of material. When we come back on Sunday, we still got more than a full show to get through. And so if we get close to the end of it on Sunday, I'll just keep going until we get through it all. But you got to realize I'm liable to come up with a huge fistful of this stuff between now and then, right? I'm going to hang on. I'm going to try to make it all the way to the 2 hour. 6 gray whales found dead in San Francisco Bay last year. That's severe emaciations you're looking at there. You can tell by the tail. And same thing with the let me go way back up right there, because that story came up again of the 26 killer whales. There was 2 found originally, and you can see this one's starting to emaciate. Peanut heads. You can see the shoulder blades. Rib cages are starting to show. That's not normal. These 2 weeks later, they found 24 more, but they all apparently died at the same time. And when you look at, you can see the tail right here. You didn't get very few good shots. You never got 26 pictures of 26 whales either. There's only 6 stories that covered it, 6 medias that covered it, and none of them were popular medias. Okay, let's get back. Conservation group urges Oregon to reduce the whale deaths from crab fishing gear. Well, the whales are coming into places they normally never had a conflict with the fishermen before, in desperation. A humpback whale, as I showed you earlier, in 2016, it was 7,000 starved to death. So they're going into places where they normally never went. Let me see here. Conservation group. Oh yeah, right. I'm just stalling because I want to make the movie. Oh, we're in business. Excellent. Let me go. We're going to get through this story, and then we're basic. It's not a very long story. My throat is so dry. Hang on. comes a week after young entangled humpback whales were found stranded near Gannets. Now, the majority, if not all, of the whales are ultimately emaciated, no matter how they died. The ship strike or entanglement. And this one, you can see the peanut head clearly, right? You can see the body is not, and it's a very tawny looking whale. Even a baby humpback, a young humpback is a massive whale. Right? Because you got humans stood up alongside of you, have something to compare it to, right? At least 4 humpback whales were entangled in the Oregon coast, and they don't belong in that spot. They're there because they're starving to death. 7,000 humpback whales may have starved to death during the blob heat wave. The blob heat wave was the Fukushima catastrophic event. It wasn't a heat wave, it became a heat wave, likely from starvation. Likely, but when you put the word likely there, caused by the marine heat wave is a permanent heat wave. You killed the function of the ocean, right? You killed the foundation of the ocean, and then the ocean is not going to function the way it should, right? It doesn't have that. Like, it's a complicated story. We might get in. Most likely, we'll get into it in the second part. 1 million Pacific seabirds also died because of the marine heat wave. So they're trying to conflate everything with the die-off. The million birds that died, they died of starvation, right? It was starvation. And so trying to suggest that heat wave just magically happened right after Fukushima and never had nothing in connection with it is pretty dishonest in the first place. The common murre. So there was a million of them. I talked about that earlier. Showed up from British Columbia, Canada, to Alaska, and they found thousands in freshwater ponds dead too, and they all died of starvation. Now, you've seen what the coastline should have looked like. So normally they would come into a healthy coastline, and there's all kinds of species, and they would supplement that with their migratory trip. That's pre-programmed in through millions of generations, right? And they're going to be following the anchovies or the krill or the shrimp, and they will also supplement that in the tidal zones. At the same time, there was a 1.4 million Cassinioclets showed up, and they were severe emaciation. And I was out there in 2015 and 16 when all that was happening, and I was doing a research expedition. The species were wiped out. The marine heat wave swept the North Pacific Ocean that was hotter and lasted longer than any records began in 1970. We never had a heat wave in the ocean till nuclear testing era. And even then, it wasn't so much. The heat wave, like, they're using that in order to misrepresent that this is a post-Fukushima phenomenon known as the blob. And that's, you remember that song I started off with? That song was created to give you another narrative to consider than the official propaganda narrative the nuclear industry has rolled out. Because surface temperatures. So, like, how does that, like, I've been on the ocean for most of my life. How would the surface change on a body of water so big? Do you know what we used to do if you wanted a cold can of pop or a cold can of something? You would just take it, put it in a net, and hang it over the side of your boat for about a minute or something. And that water, when you took it out of the water a minute later and opened the can and tried to drink it, it would actually chill your teeth. It would be that cold. Because it would suck the heat out of that little can, right? And so suggesting that the surface of the ocean is hot, right, is absurd to suggest that it works that way. The ocean is 70% of your planet, which is crazy when you think about the whole way everything works. Now, as a commercial diver, I'm very familiar with all of this stuff. It rose by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. It was actually rose by 5 and 6 degrees Celsius, right? Because in Canada we're metric. And my boat has on the plotter, the GPS, the big 10-inch plotter, my the transducer for the sounder, which is a part of the same unit, has a thermometer in it, right? And so it's always on my screen and for the pictures. And we took a lot of the pictures, right, so people would know the GPS location of the research field studies, right? The fish that common Guillemots, and this was 2015, 2016, was over 1 million common murres. They dive 600 feet all day. Not the surface. They're not feeding at the surface like a seagull. They dive 600 feet all day. Right? All day long, there's nothing to it. So when you're a bird that can dive 600 feet and you can't find food and you die of starvation, what does that tell us? Particularly when there's 1 million of it. At the same time, you had 1.4 million Cassini auklets. These are very tiny birds that are microscopic feeders, show up emaciated too. So you had two different spectrums of the food chain on a big wave because the common murre dives 600 feet all day long. Does that make sense? It certainly does to me. A new study, a fake study, believed that 1 million common Guillemots, the common murre, died due to they starved to death. And 2/3, well, we know all the colonies, right up in Alaska, for instance, failed in that same time frame. The species didn't make it back. They ran out of food. The tidal zones were empty. There was no way to supplement their diets. And they live up to 40 years and produce a single egg each year. The female doesn't start breeding until the age of around 7 and breeds until they die. And most seabirds live similar lives because the food on which they rear the offspring is often a long way from land. Well, which is not 100% true when it comes to the common murre, because they dive 600 feet all day. 600 feet. Most of the food you're going to find is going to be in the first 100 feet where there's daylight. Right? Any commercial diver would know that. Rearing just a single chick at a time makes sense, but if many adult birds of reproductive age die, there's no new chicks to replace those birds that are lost. And so the population, it doesn't decline, it disappears. It's an extinction event. They call them seabird wrecks, mass die-off of species. Research based on the estimate of 1 million dead common murres and the numbers of dead or dying birds that washed up between California and the Gulf of Alaska, which is right through British Columbia, Canada, where there's 27,000 islands, where I carried out my field studies and research expeditions. But they're not including New Mexico or Mexico for some reason. Why wouldn't you? It clearly would have been happening there too, right? Previous studies have shown that the number of birds actually found dead need to be multiplied by at least 7 times. And possibly much as several hundred times. Well, it was considered extraordinary to find 2 dead birds on the same beach pre-Fukushima. During this period, they were finding 7,000. And it was clear they had all died of starvation. To find the minimum estimate of total numbers dead, that means that 1 million dead seabirds might actually be a conservative guess. Yes, it is. Well, all the colonies failed. Where did they go? And that was them. Complete breeding failure is extremely unusual among the common murres because they could dive 600 feet all day. And that means the food is extremely short supply. No, it's gone. Where does a lot of the radioactive fallout go? It goes to the bottom of the ocean. This was a ocean temperature in 2015, folks. You broke the cycle. You wiped out the cycle itself, right? The foundation, how the ocean works with radioactive fallout. You killed a species that was, because a glass of water was 1 billion creatures. Don't forget that. And radiation, anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout, attacks everything with replicating cells, which is everything in that glass of water. Ocean was a soup of life. A glass of water was a billion creatures. A glass of water was a billion creatures. When you wiped that out, and it took a few years to play out, there was nothing to regulate the ocean anymore, and so it heats up. And so the seabird wreck, Biscoe and Southwest Biscay Bay, I guess it is, yeah, Bay of Biscay, 2014. So here they put down prolonged exposure to sustained storms conditions was followed by unprecedented levels of seabird mortalities, apparently due to starvation, exhaustion, and drownings. Is this the storm pictures? I can't really remember. Oh, this was the Puffins. Okay, so we'll give it up here. And I'm going to leave that story there for the next time, just so we can, this is where we left off. We'll pick up here because this is a super important story. And I'll bring in other supporting documentation because I'm a sucker for punishment. And we'll get rid of that story because we covered it. And we got a stupid amount we haven't got to. I'm really happy we made it this far, to tell you the truth. As whales vanish from all oceans, should Fukushima radioactive fallout be declared an extinction event? We're almost 2 hours in. We only get 19 likes. We only get 19 votes. And probably one of the most historical, important stories in human history. Backed up by perpetual documentation and years of field studies and research. I think I should be able to get a few more people on my shows. But the censorship for the last number of years has been just cruel what they're doing to us. It's cruel. When it comes right down to it, we're trying to educate the policymakers and the investors because we know they can change the minds of the country. They don't need the country to change its mind. You just need the policymakers and the investors to see this stuff and say, hey, wait, I never heard of these narratives before. I got to rethink nuclear. It's not such a good option anymore. And when you do that, remember, geothermal actually, we cracked it. We can do it everywhere. We can get rid of gas, oil, coal, nuclear, and anything a small modular reactor can do, geothermal can do many, many, many times better. All right, so I know James is working on a new technique. James Lucid on YouTube. And he's 4 videos away from 500 anti-nuclear educational videos and music, in the context of music, but incredible footage there. And he's hoping I believe he's further than hoping. He's apparently worked out something that changes everything. We're going to see get the first taste of this. This is his infancy, this technique he's going to be using. And you see, and we'll catch everybody on Sunday. We'll pick up for part 2 of this, and it could go Monday too. But it's only because we have so many die-offs. And we're, just bear with me a second. It's crazy. Now there's last night's show, we had a absurd amount of stories to get through. We didn't get through them. And so, because at the rate I'm finding the die-offs and stuff, I suspect we'll have a lot more again by Sunday gathered up. These are all of these stories we haven't got to yet. We haven't got to all of these stories. We haven't got to all of these stories yet. We haven't got to all of these emaciated whales yet. So we got a lot. So make sure you come back is all I'm saying to you, right? All right. Let me get the headphones on. I can enjoy it too. We'll see everybody on the next show. Get over and I'll put a link in the description. Just hang on a second. Now, this will disappear if you get off the page, but it'll show back up in about 12 hours or something like that after the show is over. So that's a link to the song we're going to play right now. And get over there and give them some thumbs up. And I'm going to put them in my playlist, so you can find them in my playlist, Anti-Nuclear Music. Link is in the description. It'll be there in 12 hours. If you're watching this before that, go to my playlist. If you can't find his site and the link, you're over. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody. Thank you for joining. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you can. Not that I give a shit, but it won't hurt. Take care.